Crikey, how on earth did you find that?
Could you talk us through this? The meaning behind it.
I'm actually mind blown that you found that, because I was thinking about this the other day and I was where do I have this still? I think with all technologies, there's always a bit of a period where it's a bit Wild Westy, and the internet was kind of first starting off. All these music platforms were pirates, and that was the thing that got hit. And it seems artists and art slightly seem to be getting the brunt of that this time around with AI. But that then paved the way for Spotify, has completely changed the landscape and opened up all new possibilities for musicians in particular. So I think that a lot of artists are ill prepared for a world where IP becomes more important. For artists, it's really important in this next phase of things that they protect their IP, so they document their work, they can point to something and say, well, that's my style or that's my thing. And also that if they do protect their work in that way, then they'll actually have the ability to leverage AI for their own benefit.
Hello and welcome to the Knownness Podcast, the Vault of Knowledge. Today, my guest is John Sewell, the founder and CEO of Cosimo Art. In a world of middlemen, his platform enables artists to sell their work and retain 100% of their own profits. Join us for the relaunch of Cosimo 2.0 as he rallies to drive systemic change in the art sphere and how it gives individuals the tools to manage their own businesses. My name is Naseem Reski, and welcome to the Vault of Knowledge. So, artists.
Yeah.
Are they lazy with selling their work, or is it just a tough world for creatives?
It's definitely a tough world. I think, as with anything, there are, there's artists are a mirror of all society. So there are lazy artists, there are very hardworking artists, there are lazy people, there are very hardworking people. I think artists have several challenges sort of specifically to artists. One being that a lot of artists are neurodiverse. ADHD in particular is like a big thing. So it can be very difficult for them to do some of the more kind of structured things you need to do in order to be successful in that kind of sense. And also I think, it is for a lot of artists, they're kind of they're working in a very isolated, lonely place. They're not a part of a team or anything. They're constantly putting out their work, which is this kind of personal, very personally attached to them. And they're often getting told no and being rejected from things. And so it's very disheartening. So I think what can sometimes to the outside world look like laziness is actually often more just a kind of a sense of being a bit lost and not necessarily knowing where to go or how to approach things. So yeah, I think that's something I try and do quite a lot, is to be sympathetic to artists and their position, because I think it is, it's ultimately a very difficult thing to do to be an artist.
And as well, I wanted to ask, could you tell us the core aim of Cosimo and what it strives to achieve?
So the kind of strapline we tend to use is we want to make art accessible and affordable for all. So it's all about democratizing access to art, in some ways for buyers as much as for artists. And we actually, it's interesting where we are right now, because we started out as a marketplace and it was all very much about the buying and selling bit, and the commission structure and the whole business model was kind of predicated on this idea of how do we make art more affordable in particular. But I think where we've got to is realizing that that's just part of the problem, that it's a very complicated ecosystem with lots of moving parts, lots of different art worlds, lots of different types of artists. And so, although our long-term aim still is very much the same of how do we make it, I think in particular, how do you make it easy for more people to buy art and support artists? Because if they do that, then more artists can make more money, and that's the kind of end goal. But I think we've realized that we kind of have to reverse engineer it almost and start at the baseline and help artists a little bit like the earlier question of, what is lazy? How do we help them do all the things they need to do? And then the long-term aim of that is that art will become more accessible and affordable for people. And also I do think technology is going to make that the case as well, because I think there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to happen with intellectual property licensing, the fact that we all have screens everywhere, and that is a space where art can be, and it currently isn't being leveraged in that way by artists. And so I think art is, it's one of the last things, like music, video, that has all become much more available everywhere all the time. But fine art hasn't managed that through tech yet. But I think as that happens as well, the kind of affordability and accessibility side of it will open up too. So I think, yes, but that's the main thing we're trying to do, is make it so that artists get their work out into the world.
And I agree, there's a very big potential influence of technology on art and media. What influence does Cosimo have in the art sphere that captures the trust of artists and delivers on what you promise?
So I think it's a really important question, because a lot of artists get burnt by tech platforms in particular.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I mean, we had an artist the other day who'd encountered some bugs on our platform, and so we were trying to help him out a little bit. And he'd said, it's frustrating because I like what you guys are doing, but as an artist, you sign up to all these different platforms that all promise these things, and so it just, as soon as, if something goes wrong, you just get very disheartened and you go,
I can imagine,
not gonna bother. Which I, completely empathize with. But I think what we try and do is really focus on community building and, particularly at this stage where we're relatively small scale, the team's very small, and we can actually personally get to know artists. I think that's been one of our great strengths over time, is we've really built good relationships with our artists, which has two benefits. One, it makes them feel good and know that they can trust us, but also it means we really can understand their problems and try and really get to the nub of what the issues are. So that kind of community building, and then and this is in your space as well, the education bit I think is really important. Exactly, helping. One of the things we talk about is if we're able to drive value to our artists in so many different ways, and most people just try and, I think, extract value from artists particularly at the point of the sale of the artwork. But there's so much more breadth to what artists need, whether that be education, business management stuff, just simple professional skills, professional tools, all these kind of different things. It's there's a lot of support they need, and our aim is to try and make the most of all those different touch points and drive value across the board, rather than just being there at the point of sale. And only then, the problem with that is that you're only able to work with specific types of artists who are, for example, able to sell their work regularly at a very certain price point, whereas 95% of artists are not at that stage. They might want to be, or might be trying to get there. But from a business standpoint, that means you're losing out on 95% of the market, because most people aren't in that space. So, I see, so I think it why we try and do that is because, is both because we think we can drive a lot of impact, but also it makes business sense because there's a lot of people being left out of the ecosystem at the moment. And that's a shame, for everyone involved in that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. And with the Cosimo community, can you tell us how it's grown over time?
Yeah. So it started out, I always say to people, particularly building platforms now, that build a community first and then build a platform to service the community. And it's a bit of a kind of cliche of like, don't do the whole build it and they'll come thing, but that's absolutely what I did, rightly or wrongly. Yeah. So we started out, and I knew some artists. I studied art history, was kind of starting to work in the commercial gallery space and stuff, and literally just because I went to school, I knew people at school that had gone on to do art and became artists. And so I think we'd kind of already started to build the platform, and I didn't think, because I thought what we were doing was so innovative, which it wasn't necessarily, but I was like, I'm not going to tell anyone until we launch it.
Yeah.
And then we're about like a week from launch, I'm like, right, I'll go tell some artists now that we've been doing this. I've been making this thing. which is again the wrong way to go. But we then had 30 odd artists that I knew that I could get signed up and start using it, and that was the basis of the whole that was the kind of
the origins.
Yeah, the origin of it. And then I spent a lot of time over that first kind of year doing the whole DM, just drop into people's DMs and just say, hey, we're building this platform. Here's why we think it's good for you. We like, a lot of the time I'd be like, and this was genuinely true a lot of the time. We really like your work. It'd be great if we could help share that and help you sell it. So that was kind of just, very old school organic growth on that side. And then, we've gone through different stages. So like then we were doing quite a lot of in-person stuff for periods where we get artists together and have meetups and that sort of thing. And then over the last year or so, we've post fundraise, we were able to kind of put more money into ads. So we were able to grow that way. And then also we've done a lot of work on SEO. And so we get a lot of organic signups from artists, and it's really cool seeing where they come from all over the place. And I think, that's one of the cool things about artists as well, is that they are all part of their own little communities. And then, our job is to try and help them bring those guys in as well, and that kind of voice, word of mouth stuff is really powerful. But again, it's then, I think, so we do Wellbeing Wednesday, or it's not Wellbeing Wednesday anymore, but we have office hours every Wednesday lunchtime where our team is there on Zoom, and the artists can just drop in, have a chat. We can either work through problems, in the broader sense of being an artist. We can tell them about the platform. We can just chat. So and doing little things like that, I think is really nice, because again, it's just very transparent, and it's not necessarily salesy or anything. It's just like we want to get to know you. We want to help.
It's very natural.
And I think
human.
It's important to be like that if you can be.
And how many artists is enough?
Good question. Put it this way, my best guess at the moment is there's about 12 million artists in the world, sort of in the kind of fine art thing. It's always a bit blurry of what that means, but probably about 12 million artists. And I've always had this thing. I remember when we were starting out and people were like, oh, what's your BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal? And I like that. When you're doing startup stuff and accelerators, I was like, oh, I don't know, 1 million artists, which, I think would be cool. But then there's the practical challenges of like, that's a lot of people to manage and stuff. But I think ultimately what we're trying to build is something that is needed by a lot of people all over the world, all different types of artists at different kinds of stages. And the more artists there are in the world, the better is would be my argument. So, never enough, never too many artists.
It's a good answer. Going back to Cosimo, you beat your goal and raised 6 figures in crowdfunding a couple of years ago. How?
It was very long and difficult. And I remember when we started out, someone was one of the kind of mentors we had at the time. Through a program, was like, right, well, you want to go raise 250K. I know there's 5 kind of angels that I know that might be able to put 50K in each. We'll go talk to them. They'll put in the 50K each. You have 250K. You'll be off and running. And I was like, well, sounds good. Let's do that. That's kind of what started me off on the fundraising track.
In theory, sounds great.
And then we spoke to some of those people, and they were kind and said some nice things, but didn't stump up any cash, which I think was fair. I wouldn't have if I was in their position at that point. And then what that did was it got me starting to think seriously about what it means to fundraise, what we need to do, all these kind of things. And once you start, that's the other thing, once you start speaking to investors, you start to realize what really they want out of it and how it all actually works. So for about 6 months, we were kind of, maybe 3 months, we were sort of starting to talk to people, trying to see if we could get any momentum. And one day I was talking to another advisor, and he was like, well, how many people have you got on your LinkedIn? About 1,500 at the time or something like that. And he was like, well, if you get 10% of those to put something into a crowd fund, you might be able to get, 100K. And I was like, oh yeah, that seems like a reasonable idea. And I realized that was a good way of kind of doing the whole friends and family thing as well. So we decided to do that, sign up with a consultant who helped people crowdfund, which I think was really valuable. I think it's one of the things as well. I've done several programs and courses now and actually paid quite a lot of money to get an education on how to raise money, because there's different people that need it, different support. Some businesses are good enough and the founders are good enough that they can just rock up and raise some money, but sometimes you need to work on it. And that was me. Yeah. So we decided we were going to do the crowdfund, got some friends and family on board. That through that kind of commitments there, we were able to get enough to get this VC who were doing 50K investments into a bunch of different startups, but you had to have some money committed already to prove that you had the kind of traction. So we got them on board. Then we went to Seeders at that point and said, we're starting to get this round come together. We've got close to a target. Let's go and let's do a crowdfund. And then you do the public campaign, which we did at a pretty bad time because it was right around the time when Liz Truss did her disaster budget and cost of living became a thing. And so everyone's like, oh, I don't know if I want to stick £10.81 into Cosimo. But we hit the target, we got over the line. And the main thing is it really, I think from my perspective, at least, we ended up being able to do all the things we then wanted to do with that and deliver on that. So it's really cool when that you sort of see, and again, ahead of, future raises as well, it's good to be able to see like, okay, well, the best way to do it is to go and this is the money we need to do to execute on these things to get us to this next point to then deliver and to be able to raise more money to go and do it again. We did have there were various kind of hiccups along the way, various sort of challenges with the fundraise itself, through various things that were kind of out of our control, but we got through it, and I think that's the main thing. And
you talk us a bit more about those challenges.
So, well, I mean, the main one was that there were some issues with one of our investors who'd promised quite a lot. And then their cash flow, so they weren't able to actually put the money in when they'd said. And then because of that, we couldn't close out the whole campaign on Seeders because we were waiting for that. And so that just held us up in the end by about 6 months. And that's 6 months where you're going like, well, we've raised all this money and we're kind of ready to go, but we're not, because if this bit falls through, everything else collapses as well.
Very stressful few months. Yeah.
So because the way crowdfunders work is particularly once you have to hit your target to get any of it.
I see. Okay.
On any of the stuff that comes through the platform, at least. So there was a lot of up in the air, and at the same time, one of the programs I'd been on, like I mentioned, about how to fundraise, had turned out to be, I'm not going to say a scam.
Okay.
But, but there were various issues with it, and they went bankrupt.
Okay.
And we were actually due a refund from that because they hadn't delivered on stuff, but because they went bankrupt, we weren't able to get that refund, and then that impacted cash flow and stuff. And it was, there were loads of things going on that were just really challenging. But the good, what was good was we had some of the money in, so we were able to actually get cracking on the build, which was a big part of what we were raising for was the tech build. So we got going on that. We actually then were able to launch on time, and we ended up kind of going exactly where we wanted to for the most part. So yeah, so we were slightly delayed, but it ended up not being the end of the world. And in startups, that's kind of the way it goes. You've got to kind of get used to things will probably take longer than you think. It will probably be harder than you think, but it's just sticking at it and plugging away and just keep getting those small wins, small steps towards that next goal, and
having that resilience
to
keep going. Yeah. And all of this has led to the launch of Cosimo 2.0.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about that?
That launch? So the newest...
That must have felt really good, yeah.
Yeah, it's been cool. So the new version launched a couple of weeks ago. And in many ways, the platform is very similar to what it was. But what like I said earlier, we've kind of tweaked some fundamental kind of front end stuff in terms of just how it appears. So the aim, although we still help artists sell and we have all that kind of marketplace functionality, the framing now is much more around how, helping artists present, document and share their work. So it's much more of a website alternative, portfolio builder that they can personalize. It feels more like their own thing rather than a platform marketplace.
Like a artist eBay kind of thing.
Well, or like almost like a Shopify, I think as well. So that it feels like their own, their own website. And then tied into all that, we've launched a bunch of new tools. So we've got writing tools to help artists talk about their work, so we can generate artist statements and biographies and that kind of thing. We've got our academy, so that's a bank of video resources. And that's everything from mental resilience and toughness through to the impact of AI on artists and how artists can navigate that, which I think is really, we've got a brilliant guy called Ben who's been putting that together. Dr. Benedict Carpenter Van Barthold is his name. One of the great names.
Yeah. It's fantastic just to say.
Exactly. But he's a really brilliant artist and academic, and he's put a bunch of videos together with us around AI in particular. And I think that's one I'm really hoping artists watch, because I think it's super optimistic about what's coming. And that's my view, is that there's a lot of positives to come. There's a lot of challenges, as with any new technology, but I think ultimately it can be, if it's used well, really beneficial for artists. So that educational stuff I think is really powerful and interesting. And then we're kind of working on the kind of next stage is looking towards that kind of AI assistant type thing. I don't really like saying the AI assistant thing, because I think people overuse AI for
there's a bit of a stigma behind it as well.
Yeah, and there is, and I think it's just using the platform to help artists do all the business and admin tasks that they don't want to do, and make that really easy for them. And so far, the feedback we've been getting on that's really brilliant. And
so using it as a tool rather than like a replacement for anything.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing I love the idea of is, that the most famous artists throughout history have had whole teams of studio assistants and all that kind of thing. And in fact, Jade, who we work with, who's one of the people we've been doing the educational stuff with, she was a studio manager for some Jonathan Yeo, who did the King Charles portrait. He played that, and they have these people who help them run the business. Yeah, I'd love it if all artists could have Cosimo be the thing that helps them run their business in that same way. And every industry I think is going to have moved towards this, and I think we're all going to be using these kind of tools. But as I always say, artists have very specific niche problems, and they see the world in very different ways, and to a lot of other people. And I think it's creating. I'm a big believer in these kind of very verticalized products for specific industries. I think that's because I think this last period of things has been very much around generalist platforms at massive scale, but I think
like Shopify and so on. Yeah.
Exactly. But I think what we'll see is more niche ones that really dial into the specific issues and problems of, specific user bases.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where tech will go, I think. And it might mean things are slightly smaller in the kind of, mega billion dollar tech space or whatever, but that they'll drive a lot of value and help people be much more productive and in that sense create value that will broaden those markets as well. So so I think it's something to be excited about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And a bit of a controversial question. We've touched on it a little bit already, but what's your kind of thoughts on the impact of AI on the art sphere?
Well, like I say, I'm a believer that it's going to be a power for good, ultimately. I think, I know artists are very worried, and they're worried rightfully so at the moment to some degree, because it's still largely uncontrolled. And something we're really passionate about and keen to drive home is that a lot of artists are ill prepared for a world where IP and their IP becomes more important, essentially. And AI uses IP to create other stuff. And so for artists, it's really important in this next phase of things that they protect their IP, so they document their work. They can point something and say, well, that's my style or that's my thing. And also that if they do protect their work in that way, then they'll actually have the ability to leverage AI to their own benefit. So they'll be able to make more of their work, or they'll be able and I saw an artist use this really recently in a brilliant way. I think she just put into ChatGPT or whatever, the image generation thing, I don't know, some prompt to help her help inspire her for her next piece or something. And I think I've used, that's what I've been amazed with playing around with the image generation stuff, is as a way to externalize what's in your head. I think it's a really powerful tool.
Yeah.
And then it's the same with the writing. Like you might start off with the AI thing, and then you go in and you tweak it. And I think artists can use it in the same way.
Yeah.
And that will speed up the creative process, add to the creative process.
And it'd be like an aid towards it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's, I'm excited about that. I do think that there needs to be some kind of guardrails and people need to be protected.
Yeah, perhaps some legislation around
and
it.
I think there will be, that will come. And I think with all technologies, there's always a bit of a period where it's a bit wild westy and things, the internet, when the internet was kind of first starting off, all these music platforms were pirating music. And that was the thing that got hit. And it seems artists and art slightly seem to be getting the brunt of that this time around with AI. But that then paved the way for Spotify and
Apple Music.
And that now has completely changed the landscape and opened up all new possibilities for musicians in particular. So I think that with these new technologies, there's always these kind of cycles, and always some industry gets a bad kind of
a big hit.
Yeah, a big hit and has to swallow that and try and navigate it. But that on the flip side, being impacted in that way forces people to innovate, to solve against the bad bit. So, so I imagine that will happen for artists as well. So yeah, ultimately I think AI is going to be really powerful for artists and for all of us, but for creatives and artists in particular. And someone I met recently put it really well. He was like, AI is great if you need if like the level of work you need is average. So like for most people, an average lawyer is a pretty good lawyer.
Yeah.
An average accountant is a pretty good accountant.
Same with doctors and so on.
Yeah. But with creative things, average creativity is kind of like, it's okay, but like the reason we engage with creativity is because we want that spark and we want that special
something
thing.
grand so
I think that's interesting because I hope it will, and this is the sort of super competitive me as well coming out, but it's like I hope it will kind of drive people to be better artists, and they won't be able to. They won't be able to. They won't be able to just be okay. Which I think that's why a lot of artists are worried, is because they feel like they might be pushed out of it. But really, what I think is that most artists, what they then need to realize is that their individual story and their personality and all those kind of things are what is going to drive the value then, and that they can. Their job is to just amplify that bit. And that's like AI will never have that personal story or that kind of unique thing. Yeah. And that's, so they just have to double down on that bit, and they'll be fine. So, I think that's something that artists that individuality will kind of begin to shine forth like even more, I think. So.
And I love that take. It's a very optimistic viewpoint. And it's good to hear.
I've been often told that I'm sometimes slightly too optimistic, but I think on this one I'm rightfully so.
Rightfully so, yeah, and I do agree. Would Cosimo ever do in-person galleries?
Yeah, so we've done a couple of kind of pop-up things before. That I love doing them because it's great to get artists and the kind of wider community together. It's brilliant to give artists a chance to show their work in person. I always say, like, we're trying to give them a tool to make digital life easier. But for most artists, they are still making stuff in the real physical world. And so there will never be a replacement for getting people to stand in front of the real thing. And there's some really cool tech. We're working with a few people on this as well about how you can get closer to that experience of seeing something in the flesh digitally. Yeah. But that's a long way off, I think. So, so we've done a few pop-ups. I'd love eventually to do massive art fairs and all that kind of thing. Yeah. And I also think there's a big gap, at least in the UK. I imagine this sort of thing happens in America because everything happens in America. But
the good and the bad.
Yeah. But there's I'd be really interested in having like a conference for artists.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Because like a professional conference.
Yeah, because you mentioned those professional skills and those developments and navigating this new online AI-driven world.
And I think there's a lot of space. There's a lot of space for conversation, and there's a lot of interesting people, but just getting them together and having been to various conferences in the tech space, I think it would be interesting to bring something like that to art. So that's that's something I kind of got at the back of my mind about what we could do as well. And ultimately, I think it's that everything, a lot of what we do at the moment is digitally based community stuff. It's always great, but it's always better to do it in person.
Yeah, I agree.
Whatever you like, it doesn't matter what you're doing, I think.
Even with this podcast, we did initially consider doing it online, but it's not the same.
No, it's so much.
And this is that human element to it, which is so vital to art and
exactly. And I think an artist as well, that's it goes back to the thing I was saying earlier about how they're often quite isolated. Yeah. So they're spending all day in their studio by themselves. And then even if they're on it's one of the reasons our community stuff is well received, I think, is because people, even if they're online, they then feel like they're kind of sharing something with other people. But if it's still, that's only halfway to what it's like to then go and actually hang out with people. And also conferences, I think, are really interesting in that sense, because the conference is sort of half the reason you're there. The other half is to go and hang out outside the conference and meet people. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. So I think, and that's, a lot of the magic happens, the drinks afterwards or the dinner afterwards or whatever. So, I think that'd be fun to explore.
I'd like to take you now to 5 years into the future. Where is Cosimo now?
The million artists, maybe. That'd be good. I think that. Well, that would be cool if we got one of those do a big conference.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Look, I think the main thing that I think whatever we do over the next 5 years, and I think there's a lot of stuff we're working towards, and there's a whole bunch of different things. And I think as well, the world is going to change a lot in this period, so it's quite hard to
predict,
to say where exactly things will be. But I ultimately think that where we are right now and where we're going, we have a really good opportunity to build a genuinely kind of global community of artists and a product that helps serve them. And if we continue to do that and make it simple but effective in the various kind of promises we're making to artists, then I think that will drive a huge amount of value. And as I always say, if you can drive that value, then you should have a good business, because people, whether that's artists, whether that's partners, whether that's, we do stuff with universities, like whoever you're able to drive that value to, you'll be able to make a good business on the back of that. So I think, I think that's where, if you can do that, then all the other good stuff around that, comes with it. So that's kind of what I'm working towards.
I see.
As a 5-year kind of thing.
And one of my passions as well is names. I love names and the meaning behind names.
Yeah.
So Cosimo, where does that come from?
So Cosimo is named after Cosimo de' Medici, who was a patron of the arts. He was a very successful banker in Florence but to some extent, starting the Renaissance as a kind of funder of the Renaissance. And I study art history, so he was kind of this big, when you study in the Renaissance, the Medici family always crop up as they were there. They're very important. And I love the idea of helping. Initially, the idea of the name was about, helping everybody become a Cosimo, helping everyone become a patron of artists and art. Gotcha. And it was funny because I originally wanted to call the business Cosimo, but my budget for URLs was very small. And so I was like, I nearly called it Cosimo, but spelt with a K and a Z.
Oh,
and I was like,
those costs.
I was like, no, I don't like that.
Doesn't hit as much. Yeah.
But then I ended up calling it Easel, which was a good name, but spelt wrong. Okay. Again, because I wanted a cheap URL. Yeah. So it was called Easel for a bit, and then thankfully, somebody else created another Easel spelt correctly. We're doing a similar-ish thing, but it was good because it meant I could, and we had a bit more money at that point, so we were able to change it to Cosimo as I'd wanted it to be originally, and so that's
actually a very well thought out name. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, Cosimo. And am I right in saying you have some experience in speaking Italian?
Yeah, not on a Sunday morning or whatever we are now, but I did Italian at university so we had to do a module outside our main discipline. So my Italian was the one I did. But I'm trying to think if there's a single word that I could say that would be appropriate. But no.
I won't put you on the spot, don't worry. The Lake District, a very picturesque place to be brought up. Was that the reason you fell in love with art?
No, funnily enough though, I now go back to the Lake District and I realize how fortunate I was to grow up there. It's just a stunning place, but until fairly recently, it was just the place I grew up, and it was all very normal. And then now I go back, and particularly the village where I grew up, where you're on the coast looking out over the Lake District Mountains on the other side of the bay. It's like, it is phenomenal. But I don't think I really thought about it too much when I was younger. My interest in art, I think my mum had a big part to play in it. We often kind of went to galleries and stuff. I think I always was creatively, like I made art as a kid. So I was, and art was a big favorite subject at school and all that kind of stuff. And then the decision to do art history, which is ultimately what really set me off on this kind of trajectory, was because like I say, I loved doing art at school, but I thought, well, if I become an artist, I'll be a starving artist. I don't want to be poor. So which is ironic in how things have kind of turned out. And I sort of wanted to do history because I thought maybe if I do history, I could go and do law, which I always thought was interesting. My fiance ended up doing that, so she's the sensible one. That she managed to do that. But then, but I couldn't decide between art and history. And so I went, well, I'll just go straight down the middle and do art history. So yes, that's how I ended up in this whole kind of space, really.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of what drove like your love for the art. And do you own art or?
I haven't for a very, very long time. At university, I'd kept it up a little bit, just drawing and stuff. Sometimes I think, maybe I should create an alter ego, make some art and not tell anyone, and have him on the platform,
like a fake name,
and see how good I can get myself.
It's like your own personal challenge.
But no, I don't think I've got enough time or talent for that. But yeah, I do miss making art. And something I say to artists a lot is like, it's a real privilege and, joy to be able to make art. Definitely, and so you should enjoy it if you do have that opportunity. And that's one of the challenges for artists, is keeping that enjoyment, because if it becomes your job, then it has all the pressures of work. And it's something we say to artists sometimes actually is, well, maybe for a period at least, go and make it so your work is something else, so that you're bringing in the money you need somewhere else, or something adjacent to your art, but that your art can just be your art for a bit and you can play with it, and there's take away that pressure. Because if you do that, then the work will probably be better and you're more likely to succeed anyway. Maybe one day, when Cosmo's got big and successful, and I've got time to sit on a beach and in a cabin somewhere painting, then that's when I'll do it.
Under the fake name and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And what would you say is your favorite piece of art?
So my answer to this is, and I can't, probably 12 years since I've seen it, and I only saw it once. But it's a Picasso painting called Mère et Enfant, Mother and Child. And it's literally like this big. It's really small. And it doesn't necessarily look like what you'd think a Picasso painting would look like. So it's from his blue period, and it's literally just a mother from behind, and you can see the baby's head over her shoulder. And the reason I say it's my favorite painting is because it's one painting where, I think partly because it's small, but I was so drawn to it in the like I think it was in Edinburgh, the National Gallery of Scotland. So big gallery, lots of very impressive artworks, but this very small painting caught my eye, and I've just spent ages looking at it. And I think, and also the fact that it was a Picasso, like I think people get snooty about that in the art world, about like, you like something because it's got a name to it. But like, but I think there is something powerful definitely to that, and seeing something in the flesh that person who is so iconic had made. I just thought it was really interesting. And I was 17 at the time. So that was when I was just, thinking about doing art history and all this sort of stuff. And so, that was just a really kind of impactful experience. And I think that's what it's kind of for and about, is about those kind of moments. So I think that's kind of what I always say is my favorite painting.
And when it comes to art history, that's something I'm not really familiar with. It's kind of my first time really hearing about it. What really is that? You know, is it just like in general terms, like
So
because I've heard like the Renaissance and stuff like
yeah,
that.
well, so art history is a subject. I will openly say this, and I have had this said to me plenty of times, is basically picture books for grown-ups.
Yeah.
You spend a lot of time looking at pictures. But for, I think for me, what I love about the subject of art history is history. I'm very interested in history generally, and always have been. But I think art is a great access point to history. And so that's where when I thought about doing art history, that's kind of what I liked about it. It was like, well, I can do, because you can study any point in history just as you would do with history, but you do it through the lens of art, which is interesting because art is often commenting on stuff, or there's a kind of, there's a broader cultural context to it. But I also really have always, and this probably says something to what we're doing at Cosimo as well, but I've always just loved the stories of the artist. And I've always found it's just always been fascinating to me that people have decided to make art. Like it's a bit, it is a bit of a weird thing in some ways. And
when you really look at it,
and diving into that and understanding the stories and how they got to the positions they did, and they've often got very interesting lives, and so that was something I just always really enjoyed doing, and art history is it's not a massively popular subject. I think it's probably slightly in danger across the UK at the moment, but but I think there's various courses and situations where that's the case, and I think part of that is about how you maybe I was thinking about this yesterday. I think we should probably in the UK have more of the kind of American system where you don't necessarily choose one subject, but you kind of
multiple.
Because I think that'd be, because then I think it would allow people to engage with art history
and explore their interests like that.
And people would like to do that, but they're not, committing 3 or 4 years of your life to it. You have to be a bit weird like me to do that. But I think it's a brilliant subject for engaging with history in a very kind of specific way. But it literally ranges from cave paintings, prehistoric, right through to contemporary art going on today. So it's a really deep, and there's a great breadth to it.
I can imagine, because it's over a very long period of time, and there's been all sorts of like changes and genres and over
and also
time,
the meaning of art's changed. Because like we think that's one of the weird things about where we are as a society now. It's like we see art as this very separate thing, whereas until really like the 1700s, art was part of everything. So it was more of like art, things that were made had art on them, so functional things, or
like a lot of pottery and
or things for prayer, or things like that. There were kind of various. They had practical uses, but they were made to look beautiful as a kind of to elevate them and to kind of show their importance or whatever. And then over the last couple of 100 years, we've kind of got to this place where art is sort of art for art's sake is how people would talk about it, and then also you get into the whole kind of, then art became very conceptual, and then you even move away from art being a physical thing, and you could have a thought experiment that's an artwork. So it's really interesting how, and you go right back to those cave paintings, like I said, and that was functional, but in a different way. That was often about communicating stories and traditions and passing on knowledge between generations. So in some cases, even before we had language, people using art to communicate things. And so that kind of the way that's changed, I think is an interesting thing to think about, because I think we as a society place art sometimes in a weird or in maybe the wrong place, or we put it on a pedestal or something. So that's a really interesting thing to explore as well.
Yeah, it's just kind of like from my perspective, very overwhelming, you know, seeing just how much it's changed over time. And it's interesting you made that point as well about its functional usage, particularly because when I went to Greece, I saw that a lot. A lot of the pottery and paintings had art on them. Why was that the case? Is that to, like you said, elevate the beauty, or?
Yeah, I think sometimes I think it's just people might have had more time on their hands. But
it's on TikTok.
Yeah, I think I do think that there's there was probably also there would have been lots of pottery that people use day to day that didn't have art on it. But by putting art on it, they were elevating it. So, you know, probably the equivalent now would be the way we put brands on things to show that it's important or that it's valuable. So that was a kind of way of doing that back then, I guess. So I think it's interesting, and also in that way it's interesting what survives and what doesn't, and why that survived, and how different societies preserve things from previous ones, some stuff gets lost, and I think all that kind of stuff's really interesting. But but I think it's that what you said there is really interesting as well about it being overwhelming. I think that's something I'm really keen to try and help overcome in the long run as well, is help people navigate art and understand it, because there's so much. It's a lot. It's a lot, and it has so many different meanings,
genres, different meanings, different stories.
Yeah, and
it's almost infinite. It feels.
Yeah, and so if people go into a gallery and they feel like they should know all of it to be able to make any judgment about any of it, and that's not really true. Like there's very few spaces where that, I think, where you'd be like, you're not, when you go to the cinema, for example, you sort of choose what film you want to go and watch because you're interested in it, you like it. And if you're not into, German noir, you're not going to go and watch that kind of thing. You're going to go and watch Marvel or whatever you're interested in. But with art, I think because of the way galleries are in particular, where you've got it's all there all at once. People feel like they have to be able to do that with everything. Whereas it might be that you like certain things and you go and look at a certain thing. And I think one of my art teachers at school had this great way of doing an art gallery, where you basically, and I try and do this a lot now, is if you just walk around very quickly the first time and you just go, you literally just sort of scan stuff and you maybe stop and have a quick look. But in that recce, you then pick out a few pieces that you're like, oh, I really like those pieces. I'm going to go back to those and kind of engage with them properly and properly look at them and read the thing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think taking the pressure off yourself to be like, I have to understand it all, and I have to know.
And this new age where art is just everywhere.
Yeah.
In all these different forms. And for our last question, it's going to be a different question. I'm going to go to my assistants, or maybe perhaps the Mr. Producer himself, to bring this over. I'm going to show you a piece of art.
Yeah.
And I want to know your thoughts on it.
Okay.
So it's this one over here. So we'll put it on the screen as well for the viewers. But this one over here, can you
talk
us?
How on earth did you find that?
Could you talk us through this? The meaning behind it.
I'm actually mind blown that you found that, because I was thinking about this the other day and I was where do I have this still?
Yeah.
So that
do you wanna... Oh, show the camera. Okay, here you go.
So that piece, that piece was during my A-level art project. I think it might have been my final project, and it's I think about this a lot, because what this tells me is the project Cosimo as a project the problem that it's trying to solve is a problem that has bothered me since I was 17, 18, whenever I did this. And so that, I think, is sort of me as a teenager. In the position of, as the artist, and it was a series of 4 panels, I think, based on Hogarth's Rake's Progress, and Grayson Perry had just around then done a similar thing. I think he might have called his the Rake's Progress as well. But it's the idea is it's about a story of someone got through their career, and what I wanted to get across was I suppose this was articulating what I was worried about going on to do art after university.
Yeah,
was that you do this thing that you love, you're interested in, it's really cool, but then if you don't get picked up by a gallery straight away, then you end up kind of floating around struggling to make a living and all this kind of stuff. That was kind of what I was trying to deal with, I suppose. But I am absolutely gobsmacked that you found that.
Yeah.
Very impressive. But
big shout out to the assistant producer.
Yeah. But I need to
really take it in, and
I've still got the sketchbooks that were for that project, and I think in there they've got the actual thing. I don't know if my mum's still got the actual piece.
I mean, hopefully
she did keep it for a bit, but I think I might have told her to get rid of it because it was these big wooden boards that were about this tall, and they were made to look like plinths. And so they were quite cumbersome. So I think when mum and dad were moving, I was like, don't bother lugging those. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really wholesome way to end it there.
Well, no, thank you.
But thank you guys for joining us, and thank you so much for being an incredible guest.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you very much.
See you guys next time. Yeah, thank you.